I would argue that it really was a message of weakness. It shows just how desperate Putin is because he can't affect positive changes anywhere else on the battlefield. He can't break through in Kupiansk. He still hasn't yet taken Pokrovsk. Yes, he's making foot gains at best in different parts of the Eastern Front. But for the most part, this remains a static war. So all he has is messaging. But in my mind, the messaging says, look, I'm weak, I'm in trouble. So I think that's, indeed what is happening. And yes, real quickly to circle back to your original question, there could be some temper tantrums at play here. In terms of Zelensky, I think masterfully achieving a floor, if you will, a negotiating floor by getting NATO to agree, or NATO member states, if you will, individually, to agree to putting boots on the ground in any kind of post-war environment. That's a huge win, not one that's going to be easily walked back. So very, very good week for Ukraine, even if it wasn't on the battlefield, even if the people are still suffering terribly because of these strikes. But Putin's in trouble, and he showed it by that missile being fired into Lviv in your hometown.
Joining us today, Mark Toth, Foreign Affairs Analyst. Welcome to our program, Mark.
Daniel, great to see you. Happy New Year to you and to your viewers.
Thank you. Likewise. Happy New Year to you. Let's begin our session with Russia's Oreshnik missile strike into Ukraine. Russia launched an Oreshnik missile into Ukraine overnight into Friday for the second time since the full-scale war began in 2022, and this strikes comes after a series of Russia's interesting failures, the fall of Maduro, the fall of Syria, US-sized Russian tankers, all tankers in the Atlantic linked to the Russian shadow fleet. Also, we have been hearing a new discussion and new deal arising. US, UK, France have agreed a framework to provide Ukraine with solid security guarantees. This would include deployment of British and French troops on the ground in Ukraine. What are the main reasons behind this Putin's so-called show of strength, the strikes by Oreshnik missile without a payload, to be honest?
Yeah, Daniel, as you know, because you and I conversed during that attack and in the short aftermath of it, Putin basically is in trouble. And I know others have read more into the messaging of this missile, that he's trying to remind people of the nuclear capabilities of Russia, that he's trying to let NATO know that he's got red lines, et cetera. I don't quite see it that way. I think he's out of options. This was a really, really bad week for the axis of evil, especially Putin. When you look at everything that's happened, the fact that Venezuela has fallen effectively to Trump, agree on tactics or not, obviously Maduro's gone. That's one axis of evil junior partner member gone. You've got Trump threatening Cuba. You've got him threatening Mexico, other areas, Greenland. Again, debate tactics, but it's got everyone else on their back feet. That's not good for Putin. And then you have the events that are happening in Iran. So against this backdrop of this axis of evil that's losing, Putin felt like, look, I have no alternative here but to go ahead and fire this kind of missile to send a signal, because it wasn't just where it was aimed in terms of Ukraine itself and Lviv in your hometown. It was aimed deep into the heart, very close to Hungary and to Romania, to NATO member states. And so that messaging was intended. But I would argue that it really was a message of weakness. It shows just how desperate Putin is because he can't affect positive changes anywhere else on the battlefield. He can't break through in Kupiansk. He still hasn't yet taken Pokrovsk. Yes, he's making foot gains at best in different parts of the Eastern Front. But for the most part, this remains a static war. So all he has is messaging. But in my mind, the messaging says, look, I'm weak, I'm in trouble. So I think that's, indeed what is happening. And yes, real quickly to circle back to your original question, there could be some temper tantrums at play here. In terms of Zelensky, I think masterfully achieving a floor, if you will, a negotiating floor by getting NATO to agree, or NATO member states, if you will, individually, to agree to putting boots on the ground in any kind of post-war environment. That's a huge win, not one that's going to be easily walked back. So very, very good week for Ukraine, even if it wasn't on the battlefield, even if the people are still suffering terribly because of these strikes. But Putin's in trouble, and he showed it by that missile being fired into Lviv in your hometown.
And also just wanted to add, and yes, in this framework of security guarantees, could probably close the skies over Ukraine, could commit any kind of air force to provide this backstop for British and French troops. According to Bloomberg, Russia was irritated by this US-Ukraine progress on security guarantees, and also that's why Vladimir Putin probably decided to launch this missile deep into Ukraine. However, let's cover also this seizure of Russian-flagged tanker in the Atlantic, because according to Reuters, probably Russian Navy tried to secure the tanker. However, they just retreated after US Navy approached the tanker. Don't you think that this was probably personal humiliation for Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, Daniel, real quickly, if I may, let's go back to why Putin is so upset about those negotiating points. He's upset because, look, it messes up his future plan to come back at Ukraine a third time. That's why he doesn't want a no-fly zone in Ukraine post-war. That's why he doesn't want robust Ukrainian army in terms of size, 800,000 or so or more. That's why he doesn't want any NATO member states in there, because that's going to thwart his plans. So I think everyone should read into that is that Putin's not interested in peace, he's interested in war. And that's why he's throwing that temper tantrum. In terms of the humiliation that he just endured in the North Atlantic, huge. I mean, one, all of us, looking at this from afar thought, this is a nothing burger story. You've got an old rusty oil tanker fleeing, albeit one that originated to Belawan in Iran that never seemed to pick up its oil in Venezuela. But suddenly it was on the run. Suddenly around New Year's Eve or so, it was painting a Russian side on its flag. Its registration changed to Sochi. A lot of things that started to scratch your head. And then it became an international race across the Atlantic, where you have a U.S. Coast Guard cutter basically following it, along with some surveillance planes, P-8s, flying out of Mendenhall in the U.K. To pay attention to this. For some reason, Putin decided to up the ante, not just to re-register it as a Russian oil tanker, but to send a sub after it. Horrible messaging from his part, because it's saying, hey, is there something on board that we didn't know? Was Russia itself transporting something through Iran to Venezuela, more S-400s, for instance, munitions, whatever? Or was it just simply Iran was shipping arms and stuff to support Hezbollah or its own IRGC terrorist activities, which they're known to do through their Unit 840 in Iran, has a unit in an IRGC unit, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that have conducted terrorist attacks across Latin America. Could it be that they didn't want those things seen as well? Who knows? But the net result at the end was a U.S. Coast Guard cutter with the assistance of a SEAL team and basically some British support vessels, was able to take this, rusty old oil tanker, and Putin couldn't do anything about it. He had a Russian sub there, presumably nuclear capable, and all they could do was just look haplessly on as this sub, basically turned around and went back to, presumably a Russian port. Huge egg on Putin's face, made him look like a fool.
From your perspective, do you feel that was the last week the worst for Vladimir Putin since 2022? I mean, in the matter of global power, balance of power around the globe, and Russia's stance on the global stage?
I do, Daniel. I think it's a great question and great for you to pose it that way. I mean, I did pen a Substack basically, for John and my Interrupt 360 report, basically saying, look at the axis of evil this week. It was a really bad week. Nothing good happened. And I think from that standpoint, if you're Putin, you're not seeing positives anywhere. You're seeing setbacks in Venezuela itself. I mean, remember, you had Lufthansa, Rosneft, other key Russian oil companies that were on the ground making money. They simply were cut off from that in Venezuela. That's not going to continue. That's big egg on their face. Another ally, longtime ally, more symbolic than anything else, but Cuba, was basically hanging on by a hair's thread because of their own involvement in Cuba getting in Venezuela getting cheap oil from Caracas. Now that's gone. Now they're in trouble. So if Putin is to save this long-term ally that goes deep back into the 1950s in the Cold War, It means Russia's going to be out more money, more expenditures, and frankly, you can't do it. I mean, Cuba sits there in the middle of the Caribbean, close to U.S. shores. It's probably going to wither on the vine and be another loss for the axis of evil. So that was, terrible from his standpoint. And then you have one of his key, what John and I have called the arsenals of evil, Iran, which is wobbling. I mean, this is a regime that's in deep, deep trouble, and these protests are becoming wider spread. So nothing good there is coming from Putin. Basically, I mean, if you're someone stepping back and saying, who do I want to align with? Right now, again, tactics aside, you can agree with the way Trump has gone about this or disagree with him about it. I think more people would want to be on Trump's side of this than they would be on Putin's side of this, because he's seen nothing but losses this last week. Just a terrible week, thank God, for Vladimir Putin and his cronies.
Also, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has reached a milestone, now lasting longer than the Soviet Union's war against the Nazi Germany during the Second World War. What is your reaction to this grim milestone?
Yeah, I think what's most startling for me is for Putin, who wants to see himself as some kind of modern Peter the Great or some kind of modern Stalin, in the sense that he's defending the Russian motherland, et cetera. Stalin went 1,000 miles to get from Moscow to Berlin to defeat Nazi Germany, to ultimately get Hitler to commit suicide in his bunker. I mean, at best, and again, this is just a rough guesstimate, at best, when you consider the reverses of 2022 and the Ukrainian counteroffensive, Putin has managed on all fronts maybe to go 60, 70 miles. I mean, how embarrassing, right? I mean, he wants to be Stalin, and yet his armies, are looking more, pathetic in that regard and incapable. So, the milestone for me is that such a long time has happened with so little gain to Russia, but so much loss. I mean, if you look at the U.S. in a similar time frame during World War II, we went from a country that was largely rural, that hadn't yet fully mechanized and become an industrial power that we are today. And we developed a nuclear bomb in that time. I mean, we had massive projects. We built a 600 plus feet Navy. We were able to accomplish a lot in terms of both what happened in the Pacific theater, but also in the African and in the European theaters. Yeah, Putin, by comparison, has done none of that. I mean, his economy is suffering. Ukraine masterfully is basically continuing to decimate his oil and energy infrastructure. We're starting to see more logistic nodes being taken out as well. I mean, that's all good. I mean, this is a man who, presumably at one point was in command of the second, or if not the first, biggest army in the world, and he's done nothing with it. That's my real takeaway here, is that Putin, for all of his hot air, for all of his bluster, doesn't mean he can't cause pain, doesn't mean he can't cause death and destruction. He certainly does. But as a military genius, he's not even close.
Let's also cover a next possible meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Donald Trump. President Zelensky can meet with President Trump next week or on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos to agree to have the green light from Trump on the security guarantees and big reconstruction effort, big deal package, economic package for Ukraine. What is your analysis of the upcoming talks, and what can happen in case Russia saying finally no to this Trump's offer to end the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, Daniel, look, Trump is his own man, and as we've known, I think anyone that tries to get out in front of him, sometimes you do so at your own peril. But I really do think something fundamentally has changed here in terms of how Trump views Putin. And that's a big plus advantage for Zelensky. And I would argue, look, I don't involve myself in the internal politics of Ukraine. That's up for you and your fellow citizens to decide. But at least from a negotiating standpoint with Trump and trying to affect what's best for Ukraine, I think Zelensky does deserve a ton of credit here. He's learned how to manage this relationship in a positive way, where Trump has now been able to see Putin for what he was. I mean, I grabbed my notes. I mean, if you look at every time that Putin has either had a conversation with Trump, or if you look at, when Zelensky's had a conversation with Trump himself, any of those combinations of In March, Putin bombs Ukraine. In June, they bomb Ukraine. In July, they bomb Ukraine. Around the time of the Alaska summit, they bomb Ukraine. They did it again around Christmas time, bombing Ukraine. And now, for all the biggest of fakest reasons over Valdez, this alleged attack that never happened on Putin's personal residence, you have the Oreshnik that's launched against Liev, along with the attacks in Kiev and elsewhere. Again, bombing. Trump is getting the message here that Putin isn't serious, that every time he basically tries to affect movement toward an ultimate peace deal, Trump gives him a big middle finger in the terms of bombs, and not just bombs on military sites. That might be one thing in Ukraine, but these are intentional targeting of Ukrainian civilian targets, apartment buildings, hospitals, transportation infrastructure, trains that are just traveling to transfer people back and forth from Western Europe into Ukraine. None of it good. So, that's my take on it.
Let's also cover U.S. foreign policy and current balance of power. President Trump really badly wants to secure Greenland. Why does he want to have Greenland, and how can this shape global order? Do we still have this post-war, post-Second World War order, or are we in new era right now?
Right. Yeah, Daniel, if I can preface this a little bit, as an analyst, my focus typically is just to look on outcomes. I don't get to decide what happens. He's the president. He gets to make these decisions. And so I tend to look things just as outcome oriented because that's all I can do. I'm not leading the pack. I'm studying where it might be taking us. I will say up front, though, that I do not think the U.S. should be in the business of militarily threatening key allies, especially NATO allies like Denmark. I think it's self-defeating. I think it sets the wrong kind of precedent that we want to set as a nation. I don't think we should be doing that. So, that said, I disagree with what Trump is trying to do or the way that he's going about it. I think his intent, though, is understandable from a security standpoint. I'm not justifying what he's doing, just trying to explain it, because you do have the warming of the northern sea route. The Arctic is warming. That does create new routes that are creating threats to the U.S. from the northern side of it. You do have active, as the head of NATO, Sacker, just noted, active ongoing Chinese and Russian explorations in those areas that are designed to probe weaknesses in NATO and how they can exploit that in the future. So the threat is stemming from that region, and the need to defend it from Greenland is very real, and not just in terms of the location of it, but also the ways into North America that they could represent for Chinese subs or for Russian subs down the line, launching nuclear attacks and the like. So, it's justifiable as a concern for U.S. national security, but I think you could get everything that he wants to defend against that with a treaty. You don't have to physically take over Greenland in the way that he's suggesting. I think this is a lot of bluster. I do continue to believe that this is Trump trying to get more of an agreement like what the U.S. has with Fiji and other countries in the Indo-Pacific, which just is a managed defense relationship between them that I don't see. I just don't see an appetite in the U.S. Congress for him militarily intervening in there. So I do think a lot of this is negotiating bluster, but only Trump knows for sure. Time will tell.
But can U.S. really attack Greenland? I mean, militarily?
Conceivably, Daniel, yes. Greenland has 30,000 people. It's not like it's going to be able to offer defense. I know there are a lot of memes out there about Europe defending it. That's just not going to happen. The U.S. has the capability of doing it. Now, should they? No, in my opinion. And again, I just don't think there's a stomach for that. There's a deep divide in the Republican Party where people are saying, look, this is a bridge too far, right? This is not a place that we as a country want to go to. This is not who we want to be known for. And I'll be blunt about it. I don't want us to be the Vladimir Putin of North America. I don't want us gobbling up our neighbors illegally. We are a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And under that, we're supposed to be, safeguarding what Putin didn't, safeguarding the sovereignty of all nations in the world. And that includes Denmark and its interest in Greenland. So we could, but we shouldn't.
Let's also cover the matter of Iran and protests, current protests in Iran. According to CNN, President Trump is considering different options how to respond to the most recent killing of protests by the Iranian regime, and military options are on the table. right now. The National Security Council would convene the meeting on Tuesday. What is your take on Trump's option on Iran? And could military retaliation, military attack help or undermine protests in the country?
Yeah, Daniel, look, it does appear that there's a growing perfect storm in Iran that could lead to the regime's toppling. A lot of things are going right. This is a different kind of street revolution that's happened in the past. Typically, it's either been people, admirably, women fighting for women's rights, or some minor economic issues over specific items like gas or lack of water, et cetera. This is one, though, that has started differently. It started in the bazaars, the barziris, the people that run these bazaars, are basically, or were the kingmakers of the Iranian regime the first time over in 1979. They've got close relationships with the clerics, and it's been a win-win situation for them as being the backbone of Iran's economy. But they're the ones that have been leading these protests, these shutdowns, because basically the Iranian economy now is untenable for them. They can't make money, they can't be profitable, and they're in deep, deep trouble as a country. So, the setting is there for all of this to get worse. I think the problem is, in terms of aligning what the U.S. can do or can't do, is that so much of the U.S. military assets that would be needed to better protect protesters at a street level that's happening right now, it's not there. It's too much of it is concentrated in the Caribbean because of the actions against Venezuela. So in terms of Trump intervening, which I think he should, because I think there is a tipping point here, it's got to be regime-oriented type targets. You're not going to protect street protesters yet at that level. You don't have the air corridors to do it. You haven't taken down any reestablished air defense batteries that might have been put back in place, not just by Iran, but with the assistance of Russia and China. You've got all of that Israel had cleared pathways for, if you will, for the B-2s to go in previously in June and hit Isfahan, Fordo, and Natanz, the nuclear sites. So you don't really have those alleys yet into the country, but you could do regime change type things. You could hit army installations hard. You could hit, the residents where you might think Khamenei is. It's a big country, though. It's not as easily done as Venezuela, where it was more concentrated. But I do think the moment is ripe, and I think it would be great for Ukraine if Iran falls, not just because of the Shahed drones, but it would be one more member of that axis of evil falling, one more way that Russia loses, on the global battlefield, that just further pins him in and isolates him from others that could support his war effort in Ukraine. So I hope that we're getting there. I just would caution people. I don't know that the U.S. has located enough military assets at this point to do anything meaningful to protect protesters on the ground. Now, we could do things that are meaningful in terms of the regime stability itself, but that's where it had to be concentrated in that very narrow area.
Thank you, Mark, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. Thank you.